Oh, sorry.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're live on YouTube now.
We'll let Rob get in, and then we'll crack on.
It's gone live now.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so proper good morning to everybody, and welcome to this year's first meeting of the Climate Change, Environment and Growth EAP. We've got an agenda which I think will be quite stimulating in terms of discussion points. So we'll crack straight on with the first agenda item, which is apologies for absence.
Yeah, we received apologies from Councillor Anne Lee, so Councillor Lynn Buckingham's here as a substitute.
Welcome, Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you.
So on to the second agenda item, that's members' declarations of interest. Do we have anything to declare?
No.
The shaking of heads, so that's fine. And agenda item 3 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of December. Hopefully you've had a chance to check through those for accuracy. So if there are any points people want to make on those, let me know now. Again, I can see shaking of heads, so that's a good sign. So we'll accept the minutes of that meeting. Okay, so on to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is discussion on key topics for 2022 to help develop the forward plan. As you know, we're keen to get input from members throughout the EAP, and I know previously we've looked at items that members of the EAP have asked for us to do so. So I'm going to hand over to George Candler to take us through this.
Thank you, Chair. Again, good morning, members. I think it's a bit too late now, isn't it, to say Happy New Year on the 19th of January, but I'll say it anyway. The other thing, Chair, I just thought maybe introduce Greg Haynes, who's joined the meeting this morning. So Greg started with us in the autumn of last year and helped fairly significantly with the climate change and then Climate 21 conference that members will remember. And Greg is obviously beavering away in the background on a number of research elements for us at the moment. But I just thought it'd be helpful to introduce Greg. I don't know whether you want to say anything, Greg, or happy just to listen and contribute as we go through the meeting.
Well, I'd just like to wish everyone a Happy New Year, and let's hope 2022 is good for climate change. Absolutely,
hear, hear. Right, okay, so as Councillor Pentland said, I just thought it would be helpful. We had discussions in 2021 right at the beginning about a potential forward plan. I just thought it would be useful just to both pause and reflect, but also then consider what members may want to see as part of the forward plan for the calendar year 2022. We can keep refreshing this clearly as the year progresses. So I suppose the first thing I wanted to do was just do a bit of a reminder of where we've been and what we've achieved thus far. So our actual, I don't know if you can cast your minds back, but our first meeting was on the 23rd of June, 2021. And we've had 7 meetings since then. So we've had a meeting a month since then. At the first meeting, we took and approved the terms of reference. And whilst we'll want to refresh those probably in April, May 2022, I just took the opportunity just to just reflect on those. Interestingly, they mention a sort of a number of topics that the EAP could consider for the forthcoming 12 months, which includes climate change, economic growth and the growth strategy, energy management, both of our buildings and our fleet, which is probably something that we've not covered yet. I'll just leave that in there, hanging in there as potential topics for 2022. The economic recovery plan for Northamptonshire, which we've sort of had elements of, as we know, throughout, and I'll sort of do a reminder of the topics that we have covered. And the bus strategy, we're all listed in there, and obviously we've again got that on the agenda today. It also referenced that we would have from time to time consideration of any national policy developments and also any government announcements. I think we've covered some of that off, particularly when we obviously considered the COP conference last year and our own NN Climate 21 conference, but perhaps we've not covered as much of that as we may want to consider going forward. I know it tends to be can be a bit reactive. Interestingly, that I sometimes think that the title of the EAP, this is my opinion, by the way, professional opinion, the title of the EAP maybe needs to ensure that we reflect what actually the terms of reference stated. So the terms of reference basically says that this EAP will cover all elements of the place and economy activities, with the exception of planning policy, because planning policy has its own executive advisory panel, as we know. So again, I'll leave that thought with you. But obviously, we've got 4 sort of key functional areas across place and economy: regulatory services, which includes environmental health, licensing, trading standards, emergency planning, for example. And we have had elements of that come to this meeting, in particular air quality, which we've covered. Growth and regeneration. So as we know, Rob is a regular attender. But again, we've probably centered more on the climate element of Rob's areas of responsibility, and not quite as much on the growth side of things. We've had Ian here from time to time, as we know, Ian A. Church. Highways and transport. So again, Graham's a regular attender, Graham Kane, and with us again this morning alongside Chris. And highways and waste is an interesting one, because it's sort of wrapped up in a series of contracts, for want of a better term. Obviously, the highways contract at the moment is currently out to tender, and we'll have our own highways contract from September this year. So that's sort of a discrete but fairly significant piece of work that's going on at the moment. And then the waste side of things, we have had elements and updates from that in the last 7 meetings. And then assets and environment. So again, that's Jonathan Waterworth's area. And again, Jonathan does attend these meetings with some regularity, not with us today, but does attend with some regularity. Tends to cover off more the environmental elements more than the asset side as well, I think, thus far. So I suppose I just wanted to remind us all of what's in the terms of reference, those potential areas that it could cover, this executive advisory panel could cover. In terms of what it has covered, again, just reflecting on that, there's been quite a lot, actually. We've chunked through the work, I think is the technical term I would use. So we've considered a strategy for litter, which is obviously in Graham's area. We've considered the bus strategy at different times, and again, Chris will be taking us through the enhanced partnership and the next phase of that a bit later. We've looked at the climate change framework that was originally scoped and finalised back in March of this year. We've looked at the route map that came in November. We've looked at environmental principles of the ARC, tree strategy, local cycling and walking investment plans. We did a couple of sessions on the corporate plan, you may remember. Electric vehicle charging points. We've had input into Destination Nen Valley and their work. Air quality that I've mentioned already, the Climate 21 conference that I've mentioned already. And then the Community Renewal Fund, Ian was with us last month, you may remember, providing an update on that, and in particular the green projects and the climate focus projects that have come from that. And also Graham's provided an update on the streetlights and the contract there and the carbon management positives that are coming from that particular area. So quite a broad suite of topics covered. We've got other areas coming forward as well. So coming forward in the next couple of meetings, will include updates on the bus strategy that we've had. There'll be further updates on the bus strategy as this goes forward. Tree strategy, pollinator strategy, to name but a few, and also a further update on the air quality figures for 2021, because as we know, we sort of report on the previous year, which I know is, so that will all be coming, that will be coming forward. And we'll also want to bring forward at some point sort of key performance indicators that we want to consider and how we measure and manage the work that we're doing, particularly around climate change. So we'll want to bring that forward to this meeting in the coming weeks and months. So so hopefully that's quite helpful to sort of get the brain whirring a little bit in terms of what we've covered already. That doesn't mean that we can't cover it again, but also what, if you like, the scope and remit of this panel, and also some of those areas that we've got coming forward. So I suppose I was then just going to open it up, Chair, for members, whether there's any specific topics or areas that they'd like us to consider that, like I say, sort of fall within that remit that I was describing earlier of this particular panel. So I'll pause there and have pen ready to take some notes.
Thank you, George, and thank you for going through what we've covered. It is actually a reminder that we've covered a lot of different areas, but also grateful to you for going over the remit there. So we've got hands up from Councillor O'Hara.
Hi, thank you, Chair. There's a few things, George. Thank you for that update. It's fabulous what we've managed to achieve thus far and get started or continue to act upon. There's a few things. I think we have a partnership with Revitalise, and thinking about our open spaces and that and protecting those, which I know are being reviewed by Simon, but to kind of protect them with the developments that are coming forward, especially the bigger developments where we have leaps put in, etc. Two things really. One, with Revitalise, looking at our open spaces and access to them along walkways, along rivers, etc., whether you walk or cycle, or even, dare I mention it, paddleboard. It's increasingly difficult to get access to open spaces. And I think some of that has come from COVID in terms of people could only get out and walk. So therefore, sometimes the areas weren't cleaned up after people had visited. Therefore, now those places are now being closed and access is not permitted. And that seems to be an increasing occurrence. And I don't know whether the council has any influence on that. And some of it's been done by parish councils because of complaints from local residents. Now, I know the access is abated because people are more mobile now. They can get in their car and go to other places. It's not so much the walking. But because of the actions of a few, the majority have now been affected. And I didn't know whether that's something we could look at on this committee to see what access there is to open spaces, especially along the Eyes Valley, because there's some beautiful walks along there right across the county, you know, and if you go over Thrapston Way, you can go and access the river along there. Waddenhoe's closed off. Just the open spaces really, in terms of open spaces that are being built within new developments as well, and the parks therein. George, you'll be aware of what's happened on one development where a park's been put in that really isn't fit for purpose and it isn't in the right place, but was agreed. And when it comes in on paper, it looks good. So I just wondered whether, Councillor Pentland, whether that's something we could look at as a bigger picture when developments come forward, whether we could look at the open spaces and protecting those, because I know with some of the older developments, sometimes the developer will come back and say, well, actually that space isn't really used. can we build on it? It's only happened on 2 occasions that I know of, but I think it's something we could look at to make sure there are other open spaces, because a lot of the homes that are built now have smaller gardens, and it's just nice for the community to be outside. So I think it's 2 things: access, a wider access, and opening up areas that have been closed off for whatever reason, and looking at them and working with the Environment Agency. I know in Burton we have the Pocket Park, and they do go along and they cut back all the reeds and the growth down there to help with the flow of the river, which also helps the fishermen as well, as long as it's done at the right time so it doesn't disturb them. So I just think it's something that we could look at, especially with a view to access on our pathways as well, because obviously we're all using or a lot of people are using scooters, which kind of connects in with what we're going to look at with the bus routes, and the money that's put into a bus service. Because although some people can use the bikes and the scooters that are dotted around our county, a lot of the older people can't, so they rely on those buses. So I think when we're looking at villages, that becomes a lot more untenable, because some older people are very fit and very able to walk, etc. But when you're going to get your shopping, you need your bus. And then my final point, if I may, and I'm sorry I'm hogging your time, was looking forward to our budget, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we've got about £1 million, and I think that's been split. Is it 500,000, then 250 and 250? I think.
Yeah.
I just wondered how that is being assigned, and whether some of that is put aside for commissioning, investigations into some of the work that we're doing and getting experts in, but where we haven't got that expertise within the council. I think we have got a plethora of expertise, but I just wondered whether we have to buy in some services, and if so, how much is that going to eat into, or that £1 million budget, please?
Perfect. Thank you for those points, Councillor O'Hara, and I've been scribbling them down, as I'm sure George has. So we can certainly go away and reflect on those. Just with regard to the budget, we will be talking about the commissioned piece of work a little bit later. So I don't propose to go into that just at the moment, but Rob Harbour will be taking us through that. But you're right, in the draft budget, there's an investment of £1 million into tackling climate change spread across 3 years, which is a fantastic investment, and really demonstrates the commitment that we're making as a council to tackling this, particularly with such a new council. So that's really good to see. And of course, as that progresses, we will be looking at it as an EAP, because that's a really important part of our progress that we're making. So thank you for those points. I'll move on to Councillor Dell, if that's okay now.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fenton, and thanks, George, for the update. That's brilliant. There was a couple of things missing that I thought I could ask about. Number one, and this may be covered by a different EAP, but the recycling and waste provision, that's something we've not really covered before, I don't think. I know that there's different contracts around the north of the county at the moment, but it'd be good, and I think there's looking at getting those perhaps more aligned. It'd be good to get an update on that, specifically things like how much of the waste we collect is recycled or can be used again, and what percentage goes to landfill, things like that. It'd be good to have like a little presentation about that.
Yeah.
And the other one of the other things is that from my perspective, the thing that we'll see most likely effects of climate change in Northamptonshire is flooding. And I know that West Northampton are putting together a new flood resilience team. And also, when I was at the University of Northampton for their COP26 week, there was a good presentation by the Environment Agency about flooding, and there's specifically a couple of plans they had for Kettering to build some floodplains and things like that. Yeah. So it'd be really good to get more of an understanding about what's going to happen with regard to our response to potential flooding, if that's something that we can do possibly. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you again. Noted, and I know that there is work going on in those areas at the moment, particularly with regard to flooding and the responses to that as we move forward. So thank you for those. Councillor Allibone, your hand is up next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Candler gave a very comprehensive overview there, and obviously he mentioned waste, and Councillor Dell has just alluded to that as well. But obviously we hear very little about waste and the direction that we're likely to be going in. And I just wondered when we're going to hear a little bit about what has been discussed at higher levels, because, are we going to build some sort of treatment plant between the two authorities? It's a subject that is rising surely but steadily up the political agenda, particularly with all the new development going on. And I just wondered when we're going to hear the direction of travel that we're likely to be following as far as waste and recycling goes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Again, pop that down. That's fine. Councillor Buckingham.
Good morning and thank you. I have several things that I've been asked to raise. For myself, the first one is the Environment Act 2001 and how we're going to prepare for the things that are coming out of that. As many will know, that there has been a report released on the state of our waterways. It's one of those things that I've been trying to champion for many years, which says that our waterways are dying and we need to be doing something about that. And obviously we will have lots of directives coming forward, and it's how we react to some of the stuff that's coming out through that Environment Act and the 25-year plan for our greener futures. That also leads me on to the flooding part of it. We this week have had a problem with flooding in one particular area of Corby, and we've had the Environment Agency, Anglia Water and the council involved, and people are saying it's not my problem because it's a riparian responsibility. But then should we not be enforcing our enforcing those riparian responsibilities as a champion of our environment? The other thing was that we did discuss last year the ARC and the potential that it gives us, and I think it's bringing up those things where we've made a pledge within those documents that we were sent round. Where will we put in the updates for that?
Yeah.
And also, obviously, congratulations on the Community Renewal Fund. But again, would like some updates on those greener things, as you said, George. So thank you very much for that. Thank you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor Buckingham. Number of points there that I've put down for us to again look at as part of this. Councillor O'Hara, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, Chair, I feel like I'm hogging the meeting. Thank you.
No, that's fine. I wasn't sure whether it was a legacy hand or a new hand.
No, it was just to come back on what Councillor Buckingham just said about the cleanliness of our rivers and streams. I know that there's been a report released, I think it was last Thursday, about how there's a lot of runoff water and water from farms, etc., which obviously has got chemicals which are just emptied into the rivers. And obviously the sewage that's released into the sea, which is only a few metres out, and therefore that causes detritus on the beaches and what have you, which obviously we don't have here, but we do have in the rivers. So although a river looks very clean and there's lots of river swimming goes on, you have to still be very careful. But I would say that Friends of the Ice do go and clean the river. And I know for us, we did a night paddle Tuesday. So we go at 6 o'clock, and we still bring a lot of rubbish home with us. We always take receptacles on our boards, and we always collect rubbish. But what I would also like to say is that you know, a lot of people do care about the environment, and I think as a council we have done a sterling job in putting aside £1 million to be able to make sure we are not just saying we're doing something, but proving we are taking action to help the planet that we live on. But also to say that the recycling centre that we've got, and I can only really speak for Kettering, they do an amazing job at recycling things. So I think it would be a good idea to understand what they do and how all the guys work and girls work in doing the work they do in terms of keeping our environment clean so that we stay healthy. And the amount of stuff that they recycle is unbelievable, because they do check everything that you're putting in those bins. They don't let you just throw it all in the landfill bin. They do make sure that you separate your rubbish. So they do a sterling job. And I think we should congratulate the staff up there for the work that they do and putting up with the abuse they get off some people because they can't be bothered separating it. They should separate it before they arrive. And I think that's something that we could look at, because that would have a massive impact on ourselves, and it will reduce the cost that we pay for putting rubbish in landfill that hasn't been sorted. If they didn't do their job, we'd pay a heck of a lot more. And I think we should send our thanks to the team up there, because they do a sterling job. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. No, you're absolutely right to pass our thanks on to the hard work that does go on. You know, it's very easy to kind of forget the processes that have to be gone through once it leaves your roadside. But thank you for raising that important point there. And I think, you know, talking about waste there, George spoke about the breadth of the remit of this EAP. And I know that understanding a bit more about the waste and recycling work is something that a number of members have raised. So certainly take that on board. Councillor Dell.
Thank you. Just one last point. I know that George said that we're not really able to discuss sort of planning policy or that kind of thing, but obviously there's quite a lot of environmental and climate change stuff built into that, such as like, you know, EV charging points on new developments and solar panels and things and BREEAM standards, things like that. I was just wondering if we're not able to feed into that, if we were able to receive updates on those kind of things, if that's okay. That was my last point. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. And George, I don't know whether you want to come in there or whether we'd take that away and look at how best is to.
Yeah, what I was going to propose, Chair, is once everyone's concluded, I was just going to do a quick summary and then next steps, if that's okay. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, that's fine. So go back to Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you. I've just got one small last bit that I'd like to say. So every year, we as a council have to do a Home Energy Conservation Act report, HECA report. In that report, which was done, I think it was May or June last year, it says that we need to invest in understanding what's the word, the ECPs, environmental performance for both private and our own housing. And it says about the investment that's needed to bring all the properties up to a certain standard before 2025. So it would be good to have an understanding of what we need to be doing to bring these properties up to a certain standard, and whether or not that's got the funding that it needs. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Buckingham. And one of the points you raised there is alluded to in the climate change route map that we've looked at previously. So certainly we'll make a note of that in terms of understanding energy efficiency and performance. Thank you. Councillor O'Hara.
I'm really sorry. I've just thought of one other thing, Councillor Pentland. Do you remember we discussed the street lighting, and there was a programme of works to replace the old lighting? We were trying to ascertain who owned what lighting and who was taking ownership. I can't quite remember, but what did we say about the villages? And is it something I know it's an ongoing programme, but I was asked the question the other day about ownership of lighting, etc., and how that is going to work going forward. But correct me if I'm wrong, is it a case that as a new unitary council that we are looking at all lighting and taking on board all street lighting to adopt them and put in the new lights that actually light our asset, if you like, and not like the whole street, because it's it's easier to see when it's not brightly lit, in terms of it's lit where you're walking, as opposed to lighting the whole area, because your eyes adjust better so you can see what's in the shadows. And I didn't know whether that was something that was rolling out across the whole county, and obviously including all the villages, etc., not just the main towns. So it was just really an update on that, if possible, at some point. Obviously not today, but at some point, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think, as there aren't any more hands up, I know Graham Kane, you've got your hand up to come in probably on that one. Please do.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I don't appear to have a little blue hand on this version of Zoom, so apologies for butting in. Yeah, on the street lighting, yeah, there are a number of owners of the street lights. So some towns and parishes actually own and operate their own street lights. So I don't foresee a change to that arrangement. But we do have the lights that were previously the county council, which I talked about last time, and those are the ones that we're looking to upgrade with LEDs. But then we do also have lights that were owned by the former districts and boroughs, which currently are managed separately because they're not within the PFI. But over the course of time, we will, of course, try and see how many of those we can bring together under a single management. I won't go into the complexities of doing that, and it will take us some years, if I'm perfectly honest, but that is the direction of travel. I was actually going to come in on the waste very quickly. I appreciate we're not answering all the questions today, but I just wanted to say thank you, first of all, for Councillor's comments about the waste teams. And I shall certainly pass that back to my management team, but also all the way down to the individuals who work at the sites. And I agree with you. I go to the sites myself as a resident, and I know how hard they work to try and make sure that waste is separated. And I always take an interest in engaging with them when I'm there for obvious reasons. So thank you for that. Also, I think worth mentioning that you mentioned a number of the contracts. I just want to add that we have been going to the service delivery EAP with updates as to how we are intending to deal with the existing contracts that we have. And we've recently extended a number of those contracts for a couple of years, which essentially not only extends contracts which we believe are working well for us and delivering value for money, but also gives us time to consider the longer term elements of waste management. And if you cast your minds back to the route map that we looked at, the climate change route map we looked at, within that there's a commitment to develop a waste strategy in 22-23. So I think a lot of the longer term comments you're making about the longer term management of waste and recycling will be caught up in that waste strategy that we are looking to develop in 22-23. And of course, Chair, more than happy for me and my team to come back and give you an update on anything about waste and recycling. We would be delighted to do so because we're passionate about what we do. So we look forward to that.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Graham. So I'm going to hand over to George now, because I know you want to come in on a few bits that have been raised there, but it's great to hear all the various points members are raising, and lots of those are encompassed in the climate change route map, which is good that they are already featuring.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. So members, thank you. That was brilliant. Actually, there was a lot there for us to consider. So I think what I will want to do is clearly have a discussion with Councillor Pentland as chair of this executive advisory panel, talk to the assistant directors as well, and start to work out a timetable so that it can drop into the forward plan on a number of these elements over the next 12 months. And some of these may lead into other strands of topics as well, as invariably they do. When you present on one topic, it triggers a number of questions and leads to other topics. So, but really helpful, and in particular around recycling and waste management. I think that sort of strategic overview, and also actually what's happening at the moment, we can certainly bring back at a later stage. And again, there's quite a bit of work going on in the background around structures, as we know, in teams, and the development of some resilience around flood management and also climate change staffing as well. So we'll certainly want to bring those back, as well as, like I say, some of those other areas that I was talking about earlier, like the key performance indicators that we'll want to consider and set for the council. There's a draft visitor economy strategy currently being finalised. So again, I should have mentioned that earlier, but we'll want to bring that to this executive advisory panel as well. And also the Corby Towns Fund. There's quite a bit of work going on around that, and the first phase of that work is around the development of a new sixth form college. So again, we bring a progress update on that to this panel, going forward. In terms of where there's crossover, that's an interesting one. I think when that's happened in the past, we've gone to both. So we have gone to both, just mindful of how we manage officer time as well amongst all of this as well. So what I may is, again, just give that a bit of thought to ensure that we do ensure that as many members with an interest in policy development, where there's a clear link into either the climate or the environment, how we factor that in. So, but I think it's a fair point that Councillor Dell makes, and I just need to give that a bit of thought, as opposed to doing the same update at 2 or 3 executive advisory panels. We might want to bring them together for one single meeting on specific items, which might help. But as I say, if I can be afforded a little bit of time just to give that some thought and provide an update at a future EAP, that would be great. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think the key takeaway is we're going to be busy over the next year, which is really good. That's what we're here to do. So I'm pleased to see all those things we'll be able to look at. I think this is the perfect time to segue into one of the points that was raised by a member, which Rob Harbour is going to take us through, looking at the outcomes from commissioned piece of work. So look at that, we're already delivering on the points raised. Over to you, Rob.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everybody. There are a few slides, which I'm hoping someone's going to be able to put up onto the screen for me. I think I'm going to start with a little bit of an apology, though, because actually the title of this agenda item is a bit misleading, because we're not. I'm not really here to talk about the outcomes of the commission piece of work, because we haven't commissioned it yet. We're in the process of doing that, and so the purpose of the this presentation was to update you on where we are in that procurement process, and indeed what that kind of direction of travel is. So there you go, as it says there on the title update. So starting off, just to take you through a little bit of the background. Obviously, winding the clock back to pre-vesting day, members will no doubt recall that there was a task and finish group of the Shadow Authority that did a sterling piece of work in terms of producing a climate change framework, and within that framework, of course, was an action plan, and we've reported back in the past on work that's being undertaken against that action plan, and then sort of moving forward from that, that was adopted in March 2021. Members will also be acutely aware that in July last year, the council declared a climate and environment emergency. In November of last year, we brought to you for consideration a climate change route map, and that really, I suppose, was a response to the climate change framework produced by the Task and Finish Group, and really was a continuation of that in terms of starting to set out that route map that the authority needs to follow in terms of its role related to climate change, and also the things that we need to do in terms of reducing our own carbon emissions and things to improve environmental conditions and so on and so forth. And as I say, that was presented to the EAP in November and was considered there. Now, one of the things which the route map identifies is the requirement for a commissioned piece of work. And that was around supporting some of the high-level strategic work that we need to do. And as it says there towards the bottom of the slide, some of the things within that were designing an education engagement programme for members, establishing our own carbon baseline position, and developing a carbon management plan. So some really important high-level pieces of work that we need assistance and expertise, I think, in order to get us into the right place. And it was on that basis that we've proceeded with procurement. So if I could move on to the next slide, please. So we obviously have developed a procurement document, a request for quotations, which is out in the marketplace as we speak. And it asks bidders to quote for a scope of work which is outlined here. So just to take you through that scope very briefly, starting off is the verification of the council's current carbon footprint. And of course, the important thing there is that as Northampton Council, we're a new council, we as you know, haven't been in existence for a year yet. And therefore we do need to establish what our carbon footprint is as an organisation, but we don't yet have a year's worth of data. So clearly we can bring data into that from the former authorities, but there is more work to do, quite a considerable amount of work to do in order to be able to calculate our own carbon footprint. But that, of course, is super important to understand in terms of where we are now to work out where we need to go in the future. So part, I think, of working out where we are now is to think about some of the work that we have done in the past in terms of our predecessor authorities and the projects and initiatives that we have underway at the moment. And we've talked about some of those in the past, particularly I think when we reported back and updated on the Task and Finish Group Climate Change Action Plan, because of course there are lots of good pieces of work that are taking place across the whole organisation. And as I think I've said to members before, although climate change, sort of the badge for climate change sits within growth and regeneration, it is, of course, something which is very much for the whole organisation and cuts across every part of it. And it isn't for the growth and regen service group to deliver climate change on its own. It has to be a combined effort across the whole organisation. And in that respect, there are lots of good projects and initiatives that are being undertaken, lots that will have been undertaken previously. But of course, I think it will be helpful for us to bring all that together so that we have an understanding of where we've been. And indeed, I think within the procurement document, we've asked for the consultants to look back over the previous 3 years in terms of work that we have done, and indeed some of that work will have continued through into work that we're currently doing, and then to look at the projects and initiatives that we currently are working on that contribute towards carbon reduction and climate change, so in a positive way. So I think it's really important that we're able to pull all that information together so that we have it sort of in one place and have that visibility across the whole organisation of what has and is being done. I talked on the previous slide. One of the key things there is about training and engagement. And there are two items within the scope of work here, slightly different. So the first one, as you can see there, is we're asking the consultants to create a framework for a 12-month programme of climate change education and engagement, and that's for elected members. So that isn't necessarily for these consultants to deliver to elected members. It's about trying to put the framework in place, and it may well be that what they propose to us through that framework is there's something here and it can be delivered by this organisation, and there's something else there which will be really good that members could engage in, or a piece of training that can be undertaken that will be good for members, and it can be delivered through that process or by that training deliverer or whoever it might be. So what we end up with there is that programme, that framework for a 12-month programme. Slightly differently is a training package for council officers. And that again is something that won't really be for these consultants to deliver, but it will be something that I think we hope that they put together, so that not only can we roll out training for existing officers, but as we recruit new officers to the organisation, it's something that will become part of their training programme. The sort of induction into the organisation, very similarly to the way there are other pieces of training which new officers to the authority are asked to undertake around, for example, health and safety or fire safety. So a training package there which we can add to other training in the programme for officers around climate change. Next on the list is to identify potential initiatives that could contribute towards carbon reduction. Now, there's a key thing here, because in part it's about what we need to do ourselves as an organisation, as a council, because of course, well, for one, we have to lead by example, but also we have a responsibility ourselves as an organisation to reduce our carbon footprint and head towards net zero. But we also have that wider role across the whole Northamptonshire area as a public sector organisation to take a leadership role with other organisations, businesses and other stakeholders to see that wider carbon reduction across the whole area, and those other organisations and stakeholders have their own part to play in that. But I think we have a clear leadership role there in working with them. And so one of the things we're asking the consultants to do is to put together and identify a list of those initiatives that could help us to do that. Importantly, I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about the £1 million of funding over 3 years, and that is a fantastic opportunity for the authority, and clearly places us in financially, in a relatively strong position. I'm sure we could probably spend that money many times over, but nonetheless, it is a significant amount of funding towards climate change, and we need to maximise our use of that money. So a part of what we need to do, and what we're asking the consultants to do, is to identify where there are other potential external funding opportunities, and to advise us in terms of how we can be ready to benefit from that future funding. Now, there are, as members will be aware, lots of funding opportunities that come about. We talked a little bit earlier on about Community Renewal Fund as an example, but there are lots of funding pots that come about. Often the case is, though, that actually there is a need to respond at relatively short notice with worked up project plans. And that might be that there's an outlined business case or something of that nature that has to support a project before you can secure that external funding. And the consequences, I suppose, of needing to meet that criteria means that actually, if we have a list of projects but we haven't worked them up to the relevant point, then actually that funding can pass us by. So it's really important, I think, that we have some visibility of funding opportunities that are likely to come along, but also that we have advice and understand where we need to position ourselves to maximise the benefit of that future funding. So it may well be, thinking about that £1 million worth of funding, that some of that needs to be invested into business cases for particular projects, so that when other funding opportunities come along, and some of those might require match funding from the council as well, and that might be another use for some of our own £1 million worth of funding, is that we can then secure external funding as well. And that way, the money that we do have acts as a multiplier, because it's not simply about how we spend £1 million over 3 years, it's how we make that money work for us, and how it can lever in additional funding. So I think that's really important. And finally on the list, you can see there development of a carbon management plan. And of course, that sort of goes back to the very first bullet point about understanding our carbon footprint now as a new organisation, but then it's working out what that plan is to help us reduce our carbon emissions. So you can see there that that's talking about having a strategy and an action plan to enable us to do that, which takes us down the right pathway, gives us those projects and initiatives to work on, and gives us those sort of milestones and so on and so forth, so that we can measure our progress and performance to ensure that we hit whatever targets we have as an authority in terms of carbon reduction. So that's that I guess is the scope of the work. And just in terms of that funding that we talked about earlier on in the meeting, of course, I think it's well, to some extent inevitable that out of this commissioned piece of work, other pieces of work will be identified and fall out of that. And so in terms of the question, what are we going to allocate that £1 million to? I think some of the answers will be drawn out of this piece of commissioned work that we undertake. So and in part that I think is what I alluded to in the penultimate bullet point there about potentially having match funding, potentially working up business cases for a number of projects, so that we can also secure additional external funding as well. So I think there's lots of things there which that money will contribute towards, but till we undertake this piece of commissioned work, I don't think we'll have all the answers and we won't have identified all the potential projects. And then just moving on to the last slide, please. So just in terms of the timetable for that procurement, I said that we are out at the moment in the marketplace, and indeed we are. So the documentation went out just before Christmas. We are already through questions from potential suppliers. Those have all been answered. And you can see just under halfway down that table, key date there of this Friday, the 21st, is the deadline for submission of bids. So Greg, I and other officers have our fingers crossed that that by the time we get to midday on Friday, that we have an inbox full of well-priced and well-considered bids to evaluate. So we're in the hands of the marketplace at the moment, but we've got our fingers crossed for this Friday. Thereafter, we need to undertake an evaluation of those bids, and there is a very set criteria in terms of how we evaluate those based upon a blend of quality and price. And then you can see there at the back end of next week, any clarification meetings that may be required with bidders before hopefully we can move on to the award of contract at the end of the month. Then we've been to any pre-contract meetings that are required, a little bit of time for the winning supplier to mobilise before hopefully a contract start date around the 14th of February. I've put in, you'll see there at the very end, a contract end date of the 6th of May. And I have to say, some of these dates, and you'll see the ones that have an asterisk against them, are a little bit of finger in the air. Because indeed, it won't be until we start a dialogue with the winning supplier that we have an understanding of how long the work they actually think they need to do the work. We obviously would like it to proceed as quickly as possible, hence the reason for indicating a relatively quick contract end date of the 6th of May. But it may well be that actually that's completely sort of implausible in terms of the amount of work that they have to do, or indeed that there are other things, for example, around being able to verify our carbon footprint, where they may well say to us, well, actually, until we've got data on X, Y, and Z, which we won't be able to produce for a certain amount of time, we won't be able to verify what the carbon footprint of the organisation is. So I think it's not until we start that dialogue that we'll be able to firm up those dates sort of towards the bottom end of the table. But I think what we can say is that clearly it's a piece of work which we would like to start as soon as possible, and that we would like the winning supplier to deliver at pace. So that brings me to the end of the update, Chair. But obviously, very happy to take any questions about that.
Thank you, Rob, for taking us through that. And obviously, there's lots of work going on as it is in terms of tackling climate change. But this piece of this commission is really important in my mind in progressing on those key areas that we really want to tackle. Apologies for my dog. I'm going to hand over to Councillor Dell for comment.
Thank you. First of all, it's great that there's a whole £1 billion in the budget for climate change. That's fantastic. I've got a couple of questions for you, Rob. Number one, the training that you mentioned, is that carbon literacy training that I know Councillor Fedorovich has been mentioning quite a lot, and when is that likely to looking to be rolled out? Are we talking February now? And is that just to members and officers? And can you clarify a little bit around that? And secondly, the management plan that's being drawn up, is that a living document, or is that going to be a case of this is when the consultants have done the job and said this is it, and then how does it then get updated? Yeah, those were my questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Dell. So the carbon literacy training for members is the subject of a separate piece of commissioned work. That's also out to the market at the moment, and I believe it actually has the same deadline for bids as the piece I've just described to you. So again, I think we'll find out end of this week, early next week, what that looks like in terms of a supplier, etc., and when that training can be delivered. So, and I think until we get the bids in, I can't give you anything firm on that. But it's obviously the procurement is in progress, and we'll know relatively shortly.
May I just chip in, Rob?
Yeah,
Sorry,
of course, George. Yeah.
I had the request for tender document open earlier, and I was just having a quick look at the timetable in case this question came up. Yeah, deadline is midday on Friday for bids in. There's not that many providers out there, I think it's fair to say. So we're not going to get, but there's some good quality ones. So this is about quality as opposed to quantity. We want them to start work on the once we've gone through the checks and balances in early February. So it's aimed at all 78 members. So we've slightly widened the scope. So it's aimed at all 78 members and initially a cohort of 50 officers. And mainly just to test it. it's a bit of a pilot. We've got 3,000 staff, and what we want to do over time is do a more train the trainer type model, so that we can roll it out, weave it into inductions for staff for new starters, etc. But obviously that's for the future. So as Rob said, we'll get a clearer understanding of when that starts. But I think to manage expectations, I would anticipate that we would start the communications around that in February, with the rollout in March. I think just to manage expectations. If we over deliver on that, then more's the better. Sorry, Rob, back to you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, George. And just in terms of the carbon management plan, no, I mean, of course it will be a plan, but like all plans, it will need to be reviewed and we'll need to report against it. So that won't be the consultants that I think, certainly not that report against it, that will be a piece of work that will be undertaken internally. I think we're going to need to ensure that we have almost like an internal officer project team that helps to bring together all the necessary data and information so that we can collate that and then report against that plan. But as I say, in terms of the plan being a living document, then I think like all good plans, we shouldn't make one and then work to it for the next half a decade without coming back and reviewing it. So we will of course do that.
Great, thank you. Councillor O'Hara.
Thanks, Chair. It was just going back to my query earlier, really, in terms of, we've got this money and we're going to need consultants for some things. But I think, to be honest, Rob and George have kind of answered my question, really, in terms of once we've had the reviews, we'll try and do in-house training instead of having to pay somebody to come in, because we can train a trainer, which is good use of our finances, resources, and trying to make sure that we've got the staff available and the staff time available to do that. So that's absolutely fabulous news to hear. But it's just that question, really, how much training will be needed, and also what experience have we got, so that we don't have to use the consultants. And I think that's, with 3,000 staff, we must have a whole plethora of experience. But it's not just the experience, it's having the allocated time for that staff, those members of staff, to be able to carry out the work that needs to be done to make sure that we look after the area that we live in for all our residents, and obviously for the wider world, and making sure that we all contribute to looking after the planet that we live on, and make sure we make good use of the finance resources we have got, because obviously they're being cut all the time. And I think it is good to hear that we are going to be able to get the information we need from some really good companies. It's not going to be companies that are just sprouting up because they know this work needs to be done. So, well done to the team for being able to source people that are of a quality that we require, and that we're going to use our money in a good way. So thank you for that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And I know George has got his hand up, but just quickly to say there, this is a significant investment, and we want to absolutely make sure we're using it in the best possible ways. And you alluded to drawing on the experience that we've got within the authority, which is work that is underway to maximise that. And I think, George, you're probably going to jump in on that now.
Telepathic, Chair. Yeah, thank you. So yes, members may have seen pre-Christmas a request out to staff that may want to get involved and lead a staff network around climate change. So we've had a good response from that. So what we're now looking to do is convene that first meeting, develop some terms of reference for that group, and to take that forward. So as you quite rightly say, Councillor O'Hara, there's a lot of passion and interest, but also there's a lot of skills out there that probably are untapped, that we're not aware of, that we can also lean on to help with some of this work. And that's the purpose of the staff network. How can we capture the energy that will and the passion, make sure that that's channeled into the right areas, but also where there's some specific skill sets that we can utilize, as opposed to commissioning further activity in. So that's broadly what we hope to achieve from the staff network going forward. But again, we're happy to keep members briefed on that as we move forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, George. Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Rob, for a very comprehensive overview of the thoughts behind carbon reduction. And one of the interesting things for me is the innovation that you want to look for projects going on in the future. So I know that there's some good funding going on around that innovation area. The thing that I'd like to know is, will this also have an impact on some of the other directorates in terms of, and I know George said earlier that it's nothing to do with planning, but will we have the ability to put targets for carbon reduction within the planning system? Is that sort of thing that, you know, because I don't see it as a singular thing. I see it as a, you know, a wide, broad brush. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckingham. Rob, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point that you make, Councillor Buckingham, and you know, indeed, I think as we talked about earlier on, you know, climate change and carbon reduction is something for the whole organisation, and you know, and all service areas have a part to play in contributing towards that. Clearly, what will come out of this piece of work, I think, will be some kind of timeline of milestones in terms of how we manage and reduce carbon. And I think that will then play into other policies that we develop, for example, and strategies, because of course we do need to make sure that that they are consistent and that they are contributing towards that sort of that ultimate end goal. So hopefully that answers your question. But yes, I think in effect this provides a foundation, and other things therefore feed into and knit into this, and should do in quite a kind of coherent way, so that they all contribute towards that kind of that end goal or target.
Great, thank you. So we haven't got any other hands up. We've covered that piece off well, and I'll be interested to see how this progresses, and I'm sure the EAP will be as well. So thank you for taking us through that, Rob. So we will move on to the last substantive item on the agenda now, which is looking at the bus strategy again. Obviously a really important piece of work. So I'm going to hand over to Chris Ragg, I believe it is. And just to say, we've obviously got Councillor Lorman here with us, as the bus strategy clearly falls into his area of work.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies that I can't, you can't see me, but the system refuses to accept that the camera's connected when I use Zoom. So it works on other things, but not this way for some reason. So I don't know if there's a presentation. I don't know, is Raj going to share the slides, or do I need to? No, Raj is doing it. So I'm Chris Ragg, the Transportation and Development Manager for the Council, as it says, and basically what I'm going to go through in the presentation is what an enhanced partnership is, what the legal requirements set down for consultation are, what the timescales that leads to, how that fits with funding, and then the various commitments that are made by the Council and operators in the enhanced partnership scheme that's out for consultation. And then give some context in the wider funding situation the bus industry is facing. So in terms of what an enhanced partnership is, it's essentially a legal agreement between the council and local bus operators set out in the Bus Services Act 2017, which amends the Transport Act 2000. And the enhanced partnership consists of an enhanced partnership plan, which is to some extent a rewrite of the bus service improvement plan we sent to government in October. and an enhanced partnership scheme which actually has the commitments of the two parties in it. And both the council and the bus operator partners doing things to deliver better bus services for the area. And one of the important things with that is once it's actually legally made, it is binding on all bus operators in the area who qualify for it, whether they've actually agreed to it or not, which is one reason there's actually quite a lot of legal requirement over the consultation. So the consultation basically has three phases. There's a 28-day statutory consultation with the operators where they can make a statutory objection, and the objection thresholds are effectively around their share of the bus market in the council area. That's the commercial bus market. However, the guidance that Department for Transport has issued makes it that the document should be prepared in consultation with the operators ahead of that. A consultation with the stakeholders, which isn't set out who that should be, but the guidance suggests that that should be 28 days. And then if there are going to be any changes following that stakeholder consultation, there must be a further 28-day consultation with the operators with a further right of objection. And only if there are insufficient objections to operators can the council make the scheme, which would normally be done by an executive decision. The timescales which the Department of Transport has set of having an enhanced partnership in place by the end of March did not make it possible to do all this sequentially and meet the internal deadlines for an executive report. So to reduce the risk of objections, the department suggested that we should have an informal consultation with the operators in advance of the formal consultation, which was done very quickly before Christmas. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So the informal consultation with the operators was over a 2-week period before Christmas. We then launched, that led to quite a lot of very useful feedback from them. We then launched the formal consultation with operators, which ran for 28 days, ending today. So as far as I know to date, there have been no objections, so that's good. In some ways, that proves that the informal consultation has done its job. The plan is then to have the stakeholder consultation for 28 days starting next week. And the timescale we were working on to meet that deadline of the end of March would have meant an executive decision on the 17th of March, which would mean that the papers had to be finalised on the 17th of February, which is during the consultation period with stakeholders. So we wouldn't have actually known what the stakeholder consultation was saying when we wrote the executive paper, and neither would we have known whether we were triggering that second round of operator consultation. So the intention was, if necessary, to ask executive for delegated authority to agree any final changes to allow that second round of operator consultation to go through. However, on the 11th of February, the Department of Transport wrote to all local transport authorities saying that they now only require a draft enhanced partnership scheme to be submitted to them by the, and I've realised the slide's wrong, it's actually by the end of April. And they also state it is not necessary for the draft enhanced partnership to have started the consultation process. This, it has to be said, has rather perplexed most local transport authorities because, you know, they told us we didn't have to do something after we had to have started the process. So we can't quite work out what the exact rationale for this was. But it's worth saying that most local authorities who have commented, there's a Department of Transport have basically a question and answer site. And most local authorities who've commented it are still intending to press on with making the scheme, because having got this far, we don't particularly see the benefit of not doing so. The only thing that it is intended to do as a result of that letter is to delay the executive report till the April meeting, which allows us to have the results of the stake consultation known when we actually write the paper, which will be full. And also, if we move on to the next slide, please. We should also, hopefully, during February, know what the results of the funding bid to the department through the bus service improvement plan were, and be able to actually incorporate those and what that means into the report to the executive in terms of working the future. Also, the result of any extra funding for bus subsidy, which may be secured through the council's budget. It's obviously in there as a proposal. That's what's gone out to consultation, won't be known until February. And so with the need for the consultation to start in December, the initial enhanced partnership can only be reflective of the funding that is currently available. And any further commitments will need to be included in future variations of the plan and scheme, which is allowed for in process. But what this critically means is the enhanced partnership cannot yet be reflected of the wider desires of the public for better services expressed through the consultation we did in September and October last year. And they're going to be frustrated if we ask them again for their views on the same topic. So the intention is that the stakeholder consultation next week will be limited to key organisations and not the wider public, which is in line with guidance from Transport Focus, the overall sort of transport consumer organisation, that if you've done it in the BSIP, you don't need to do it for the enhanced partnership. So, and the next slide just gives a list of the organisations that we're intending to consult as part of that process. And the next slide. So in terms of the commitments that we're making in the plan, basically, as I said, these are things that we put in the plan, in the scheme, sorry, are things that the council needs to continue to do until March 2025, or it could indeed, with the slight delay, be April 2025. So it's maintaining the bus street in Wellingborough, the bus gate in Wellingborough, the 2 bus-only streets in Kettering, the real-time information displays at bus stops, maintaining current street lighting levels in the vicinity of bus stops, maintaining concessionary travel reimbursement both reimbursement to operators and availability to the public in line with Department of Transport guidance, maintaining the various bus interchanges in the main towns, using our parking enforcement powers to enforce the traffic regulation orders to make bus journeys more reliable, maintaining bus timetable links on our website to the various sites of the operators, and making maps available on our website. So those are all things that are current, that are done from current funding. And on the next slide are basically the first things are some new commitments that have minimal cost. So we felt we could sign up to them. The first is not, as I'll talk about a bit later. At the moment, we're reimbursing operators for concessionary fares at pre-COVID levels, and that will be stepped down in accordance with Department of Transport guidance. We need to develop a bus passenger charter as part of the enhanced partnership and bus strategy work. So that had to be done anyway. And also develop a 3-year marketing plan for bus services and a strategy for alternative fuels. And then the sort of key things that then subject to securing funding from the BSIP to do it is measures to reduce the delays to buses along the key corridors identified in the bus service improvement plan as having the heaviest delays, which are the Kettering to Desborough and Kettering to Burton Latimer corridors. Review of provision at bus stops with an intention to improve, including the provision of more real-time displays, and reducing the impact of roadworks by better coordination. And then in terms of the commitments that operators are being asked to sign up for core network services to operate at a consistent frequency between 7:30 in the morning and 6:30 in the evening on Monday to Friday, and to carry out an overall network review by April 2023. Work together to phase out Euro 3 and Euro 4 engine buses, and ideally, and I don't think the operators would have a problem with the principle of this, yeah, we would be actually setting targets to do that, but the problem is with the financial state of the bus industry, basically most operators have no forward investment plans. For 80% of the fleet to have digital recording CCTV by 1st of April 2025, which is one of the things the bus strategy is keen on for safety reasons. To have automatic vehicle location technology fitted to the buses so that the real-time systems hopefully know where they are by April 2023. And for fleets over 20 vehicles in the Northamptonshire area, of which there is only one, develop investment plan for non-fossil fuel fleets. And that particularly, is in terms of ticketing, to look at having contactless payment in place for all services by the 1st of April 2023. Most are already there. Explore common fare stage boundaries. So if you were to actually travel over the same section of route, and there's very on different operators, and there's very limited examples in Northamptonshire where this happens, that you would actually pay the same fare to whichever operator you travelled on. To develop multi-operator smart ticketing, so that you have some form of smart ticket that can be used on all operators. Develop fare capping, which is really an add-on to that, so that there is if you do a certain number of journeys over a day or a week or a month, there is a maximum that you actually cap at, that you actually pay. For operators to display information on multi-operator tickets with the same prominence as they do with their own tickets. To display information on forthcoming service changes on the vehicle, and to develop timetable information and maps. For the operators all to have, to work on their customer charter. Some have one at the moment, some don't. But also one of the things the operators did point out to us, which was very sensible, the need some exceptions when some of these things might not, but given they are legally binding, when you might not have to do this. And some of these are, the sort of, the things you would never expect to happen, but can, such as, somebody invests in a fleet of new vehicles and then they all get recalled by the manufacturer for modernisation. Or indeed, as has happened in the industry from time to time, there is a major flooding institute at a depot which puts the whole fleet or a large part of it out of operation, or a fire in the depot. Industrial action, ticket machines failing, which can prevent actually accepting and issuing certain tickets, and also incidents with passengers. So next slide, please. So that's really what's in the enhanced partnership scheme. In terms of the wider situation that the bus industry is facing, since March 2020, there's been a substantial loss of passengers that had been building up, so that by sort of October time, it had got up to about 75% of pre-COVID levels. With the Omicron variant and the additional restrictions and people just being careful that have been put in place, that's dropped down to about 70% of pre-COVID passengers. Commercial services have been maintained by direct government funding to operators, government is currently funding operators with a fixed amount of funding and expecting them to operate around 90% of normal services. So you'll see that, funding gap, the obvious funding gap between if you've got 90% of the costs and 70% of the income. And also by local authorities maintaining concessionary payments to operators at pre-COVID levels. The direct government funding runs out on the 31st of March, and the indication has been that the Treasury did not. There are rumours that the Treasury is relenting on that, given the impact that Omicron has had, but we have to wait to see if that happens. And also local authorities will have to reduce their concessionary fare payments in stages to 90% of pre-COVID levels from the 6th of April, and then by 5% more every other month until current actual patronage is reached. Exactly how that works will depend on the statutory order that's laid before Parliament, which we haven't seen yet, so whether there is any. But the combined impact, if that happens, is, it's almost been described by many of the operators as a bit of a cliff edge. It's something that, has been expected to happen at points over the last 2 years. But if it does happen in that way, then the likelihood is that operators will need to reduce their service levels to match the income they've got available. And, what that's likely to mean, by and large, I suspect, is, as has already happened to some extent, because obviously things like driver shortage recently haven't helped, both because of COVID absence and people leaving to drive HGVs, reducing half-hourly services to hourly, 15-minute services to 20 minutes, etc. But it's also possible that there could be some services that may be completely commercially withdrawn. And obviously that has impacts in terms of what local communities might expect the council to step in and help. So that's the end of the presentation on that buoyant note, I'm afraid. But if there's any questions, happy to answer them, Chair.
Thank you, Chris, for taking us through that and going into the detail. We've got a hand up from Councillor O'Hara.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I couldn't get back on then. Just a few questions. I've just got a few concerns in terms of, presently there are some bus stops that do show the times that buses are going to get to the stop, but frequently, because I think of roadworks, the buses are delayed, so then you'll get 2 or 3 turn up at the same time, which then has an effect on some people who are trying to get to the hospital, because some of the bus service routes have changed, so they have to go, for example, from Burton into Kettering, and then from Kettering town centre, they then have to get another bus up to the hospital, whereas before there was a bus that went direct to the hospital, which is a far more equitable position for most people, especially if you're elderly and you've got a number of appointments to attend, seeing as the hospitals are now starting to run some clinics again. So I don't know whether that's something that can be discussed and how you work around that. I know you said that in your slides, and obviously we read the document that you've just presented, hence my question. But it is a concern, and an ongoing concern, that the services will lessen if the contribution from the government is lessened. And also, a lot of our children travel on buses to school, which are the older buses, and those older buses are also used for school trips. And if you want to move to the newer vehicles, how are these operators going to be able to afford new vehicles? And more importantly, how are they going to afford vehicles that are run electrically? You've got our cities that have already invested in that, but they're cities, so they have the volume. We don't have the volume of people using buses in this area. It's very much a car orientated, which in today's world is not the greatest thing. And we are all being encouraged to purchase electric vehicles, but there are not enough charging points at the moment being offered or have been installed across our county. And that's not a failing of ours, that's just the way it is. It's just pure economics, one imagines. But even for those companies and for those, dare I say, even village halls or community centres or wherever that have tried to put an electric charging vehicle point in, they then have the problem of not realising that these installers come along, put them in, and don't explain that you've actually got to hook them up to the actual network and get authority. And there's a whole plethora of work that goes into that to be able to do that. So my concern is then that if we do get operators who want to run electric buses, run buses that are electrically powered, what happens for them to be able to get the charge? If you've got a Tesla car, it can be charged very, very quickly because it has fabulous batteries. But a lot of the cars that are available nowadays don't have that technology invested in them, and that's why they're a little bit cheaper than a Tesla. So, when you're comparing buses and the type of buses that we need, we don't need double deckers on all our roads. We do need the smaller vehicles that go out to the villages that have the ability to negotiate the smaller road network that we have within the villages. And so that really is a consideration for the bus operators. We have a desire, but the ability to provide is going to obviously be dictated by financial incentives that may be offered by the government, or the ability of the operators to put that in financial package in place, for want of a better word. And I know for us, we've tried to use companies in the past that have been environmentally friendly. We tried to use electric vehicles for some of the events that I've attended in terms of running and marathons and things like that. And it's just not been, the availability is just not there by a whole plethora of companies. You're very restricted. So I do have concerns as to, we want people to sign up or even impose the agreement on them, but there isn't the financial availability to be able to adhere to it. And would we then get people walking away, or indeed companies saying, well, I'm not going to operate in this area? So I think we're walking a very fine line in being able to provide a service to all our residents that we're trying to do in an economical way, but the money isn't there within the companies, I think, buses or coaches, to be able to provide that. So that is a concern that I'd like us to address, please. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor O'Hara. Don't know if, Chris, you wanted to come back in on any of those points. Or just happy or note them.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, great challenge to the industry if there isn't that, because things like the school bullet tend to be vehicles that they often line service, where that's actually on bus services or coaching. So if new vehicles coming through at the front end of the market, that obviously has impacts further along. Some ways, bus operator charging slightly easier than charging, because bus operators basically charge the base large depots. The challenge of that, whether the depot is actually laid out in such a way that it to hook all the vehicles, depending on how many you've got, but those things where the battery technology is changing. And one of the things I was reading over the weekend, I think it was an article from somebody who, one of the challenges is a lot at the moment originally designed that have had batteries put in them, and that actually means they're heavy to be because it's things like they're designed to carry the engine back, frames to do not where you carry batteries, and you can actually speed of the vehicle, you reduce the battery power you actually need, which means you can charge them faster. And so there are all those things, but equally one of the challenges is if you actually have to upgrade the supply to actually do it, that can be hugely prohibitively costly if the main, I can't think of the main supply, is not quite, the network supply, electricity supply to the depot area needs upgrading to be able to do this. And that is one of the issues that the the industry's found that can otherwise destroy a good business. So the piece of work we've identified to do in the bus service improvement plan is to look at what the practice those depots that serve Northamptonshire are.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you very much. Please excuse me, I keep getting frog in my throat. We have problems at the moment with our bus network within Corby in terms of bus drivers, shortages, going off sick, etc., etc. And also the rising costs of fuels and things. While I know it's not strategic, I didn't see anything within your presentation about training a new generation of bus drivers or how that will happen. And maybe a silly question for this, but the network at the moment is really, really struggling. What can we put in place as part of this enhanced partnership to make things easier? Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, am I back in saying there's a microphone?
Yes, we can hear you. It's a little bit in and out, but we can hear you.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's not something we put because that's very much a personal view. If there's a service, there has to be a driver. So, to the Stagecoach, who are obviously the largest operator in Northamptonshire, have a record number of people going through their drive school at the moment. It offers them to be trained up and be professional, starting to emerge now. In ways that can do to stabilise the network is to actually people travelling on the bus again. Some of that is about what the long-term impact of changes in patterns like more working from home is going to be, because that's obviously going to reduce the journeys people make that they might have made on bus. But one of the things is with the marketing strategy we talked about is to actually it is safe to the bus to travel on the bus, you know, and on public transport generally, because unfortunately one of the messages that came out in 2020 was that it was essentially dangerous to travel on the bus, and that has, I think there's an ongoing of that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Councillor Dell.
Thank you, Chris, for the presentation. I just want to sort of go sort of maybe a little bit bigger picture, because obviously part of I think we know that the large part of Northant's CO2 emissions comes from transport and from car use. So as a bigger picture, we obviously need to get people using the bus more. But there seems to be a catch-22 between the number of the operators aren't willing to invest in more routes and things because they haven't got the passenger numbers. So I didn't know if there's possible solutions out there for that. How do we get more people using the buses? And in terms of funding, I saw recently that Leicester are following the Nottingham model and are going to be charging companies with more than 10 parking spaces. I think it's like £450 a year, and then investing that into their city infrastructure for their public transport infrastructure, which I think they said could rise like 95 million over the next 5 to 10 years. Obviously, that's a city, Nottingham and Leicester both cities. Would something like that have been thought about for our larger towns, or is that something that would work? Or I'm just wondering how we get around this problem of passenger numbers and the operators not wanting to invest in extra routes because the passenger numbers aren't there. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, Chris, did you want to come in there, and anybody else who wanted to chip in on that?
Yeah, in one of the things that's in the bus that we've asked for funding in the bus service for what's known as kickstart funding to actually get bus routes started in advance of money to do them. See how successful that, because obviously the amount to put a bid for to government is way in excess of what's actually available. In terms of things like parking levy, that's, I think, not something that has ever been looked at that seriously in here. There was some examination, gosh, it must be over a decade ago now, probably 15 years, at looking at the possibilities of doing road user charge different ways. One of the challenges for that has generally been the of not so much the labour market, but the employment land market. Yeah, that if you actually do some of these things to some of the employers, will they just ship themselves to somewhere else that doesn't do that? That's one of the big challenges, but it's not. I say it's some years since that's been looked at.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lorman, you've got your hand up.
No, I thought I ought to answer some of the things. Councillor O'Hara's gone now, unfortunately, but she made a comment about operating. Obviously, we're not looking to operate services ourselves. We're looking to work in partnership with operators, and things such as employment of staff and purchase of vehicles are completely down to the operator. We're in there. In terms of new vehicles, I suspect a lot of the operators are actually waiting for hydrogen to become the better option. They don't have to charge them in there. They have a better range. The engines are more reliable and stronger. I've been to a number of exhibitions and conferences about this, and hydrogen seems, for things like big freighters and the bigger stuff, hydrogen seems to be being looked at more favourably. So that could be why some of the investment. Again, Councillor O'Hara, I think it was talked about, no, Councillor Dell maybe talked about some of the usage of it. And one of the things that's in the plan is for demand responsive transport. And it's something I'm in favour, and I'd like to see a proper demand responsive transport over the whole Northampton. We've got it in some areas, and it used to be in other areas, but we need to, that will enhance the villages with smaller vehicles so that they're not as gas guzzling, if you like, and it's easier to get electric smaller vehicles than it is to get the bigger ones, and there are many of those on the market, and delivery of the bigger electric vehicles is quite strong, and the prices, you can almost double the price of a normal one, so that's another barrier. And one of the things about the demand responsive, that when I had a meeting with Stagecoach, was that they were happy that they could look at things like hubs, transport hubs, so the demand responsive could come in the villages, come into a main centre and coordinate with the major routes, the X routes and so on. So that's part of this. Obviously, we can't set the routes. All we can do is tender for a route to be subsidised, and that has to go through a proper process. And so, I can't remember who it was now. Somebody asked about how we get more people on, but it's obviously enhancing the experience. So if you've got to stand on a cold, wet roadside waiting for a bus, so things like new shelters can make all the difference to somebody. The information that we're talking about can make a lot of difference. The reliability we've spoken about, that can make a difference. So all those things are in there. And hopefully we can do. I mean, talking about the parking levy, that's definitely not something we're considering. Apart from anything else, there's so much free parking in Northamptonshire that it would just cause displacement to other places, and that I don't think that would benefit anybody really. But the main thing is all these things. What we need is more buses. So I'm hoping that we get the money. The request of the government, they've got about £1.5 billion to spend after they've given the money to the cities. they're sitting on requests for about 6 billion. So there's going to be some shavings. I don't know how much money we're going to get, but I'm hopeful that one of the things we can do is invest to get some of the routes replaced that were closed before, and perhaps some new routes where they're in demand, particularly, as I say, demand responsive. But we have a way to go yet, and ultimately we'll see what comes out of the consultations and how much money we get from the government before we know how far we can go with this.
Thank you, Councillor Lorman. That's useful to come back in those points for members there. I can't see any other members wishing to raise points, so I think we're fine to leave that item there, and thank you for your discussion on that. We will go to agenda item 7, which is the close of the meeting. So just before we close the meeting, thank you everybody for your input. From the work we've gone through today, it's clear we're pushing ahead at pace on a whole range of items, and I'm grateful to the officers for all their work, and it's good to have Greg Haynes along with us today, an important member of the team in tackling all of this, so thank you, and look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting, which is on